Case 1. Timothy McVeigh. On the morning of April 19, 1995, a yellow Ryder truck pulled into the drop-off zone in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, at approximately 9:02 a.m. Inside the truck was a homemade explosive device constructed from approximately 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, nitromethane racing fuel, and Tovex explosive gel, packed into 55-gallon plastic drums and 20-gallon metal containers. The blast radius reached 30 blocks. 168 people were killed, including 19 children who were in the building's second-floor daycare center. 680 more were injured. The structural damage exceeded that of any domestic bombing event in American history to that point. The man who parked the truck was 26 years old. Timothy James McVeigh was born April 23, 1968, in Lockport, New York. He was a quiet, solitary child who moved frequently after his parents divorced, raised largely by his father. He was interested in computers before they were common household items. He was interested in firearms before he was a teenager. He graduated from Pendleton Senior High School in 1986 and enlisted in the United States Army shortly after. He was not an average recruit. He earned expert qualification on the M16 rifle. He was named the top gun in his unit. During the Gulf War in 1991, he served as a gunner on a Bradley fighting vehicle in Iraq and killed Iraqi soldiers in combat at ranges of more than 1,000 meters. He received the Bronze Star. He was recommended for Special Forces selection. He failed the selection process and was discharged from the Army shortly after. He returned to civilian life convinced the federal government was tyrannical. He read The Turner Diaries, a white nationalist novel depicting a truck bomb attack on a federal building, and carried it with him. He traveled to gun shows across the country. He became increasingly fixated on the 1993 siege at Waco, Texas, and the 1992 incident at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, two events in which federal agents engaged in violent confrontations with anti-government Americans. He chose the anniversary of the Waco fire as the date for his attack. He did not work alone, but he made the decision. He mixed the bomb. He drove the truck. He walked away wearing earplugs. McVeigh was arrested 90 minutes after the blast, 80 miles north of Oklahoma City, when a state trooper pulled him over for driving without a license plate and discovered he was carrying a concealed weapon. The trooper's name was Charlie Hanger. McVeigh was in custody before investigators had even confirmed the bomb's origin. He was tried in federal court in Denver, Colorado. He was convicted on 11 counts of murder and conspiracy on June 2, 1997. He was sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana, on June 11, 2001. He was 33 years old. He was the first federal prisoner executed since 1963. He issued no apology. His final statement, written in advance, was a 19th-century poem called Invictus, which ends with the line, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He never held a cell at ADX. He was on federal death row. But his case opened the door for every case that follows, because it established, beyond legal or political debate, that American-trained soldiers could turn their skills against American civilians. Case 2. Ted Kaczynski. On May 25, 1978, a package was found in a University of Illinois Chicago parking lot. It was addressed to a Northwestern University professor. The professor had not ordered any package. The postal inspector who opened it was injured by a small explosion. It was a pipe bomb, crude, improvised, targeted. It was the first of 16 attacks over 17 years that would kill 3 people, injure 23 more, and generate the largest and most expensive investigation in FBI history to that point. The man who built those bombs had a measured IQ of approximately 167. He enrolled at Harvard University at age 16. He had completed his undergraduate degree in mathematics by the time most students are finishing their sophomore year. He earned a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan at 25. His doctoral thesis was so advanced that only a handful of faculty members could evaluate it. He was offered an assistant professorship at the University of California, Berkeley, at 25, one of the most competitive academic positions in the country at that time, and resigned without explanation 2 years later. Theodore John Kaczynski withdrew from civilization. He moved to a 10 by 12-foot, unheated wooden cabin in the Montana wilderness, outside Lincoln, near the Continental Divide. He had no electricity. He had no running water. He hunted and gardened for food. He studied the works of Jacques Ellul, a French philosopher who argued that modern industrial technology was destroying human freedom. He came to agree with Ellul so completely that he decided industrial society needed to be dismantled and that the people responsible for advancing it needed to be stopped through violence. He targeted universities and airlines, hence the name the FBI gave him, Unabomb, for university and airline bomber, later reported as the Unabomber. His victims included a computer store owner killed in Sacramento, a University of Michigan graduate student injured by a bomb disguised as a nail-filled roadside lunch bag, a Yale University computer science professor killed by a parcel bomb, and a New Jersey advertising executive killed in 1994 by a bomb mailed from San Francisco. The patterns in the bombs were inconsistent enough that investigators could not agree for years on whether they were looking at one bomber or several. He evaded capture for 17 years because he built everything by hand, left no fingerprints, used no electronic communication, and purchased materials with cash across multiple states. The FBI called it the UNABOM case. The task force assigned to it at its peak numbered 150 agents and had consumed approximately $50 million in operational costs. He was caught in 1995 after his brother, David Kaczynski, read the 35,000-word manifesto he had demanded newspapers publish under threat of further bombings. David recognized the language patterns, the specific phrasings, the ideological arguments. He contacted the FBI on February 7, 1996. Agents raided the Lincoln cabin on April 3, 1996. Inside, they found 40,000 handwritten pages of personal journals. They found bomb components. They found a complete live bomb ready to mail. Kaczynski was indicted on 10 counts of explosives violations and 3 counts of murder in 1996. He attempted to fire his lawyers before trial, demand to represent himself, and ultimately plead guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced on May 4, 1998, to 4 consecutive life terms plus 30 years, with no possibility of parole. He was transferred to ADX Florence. He died at ADX Florence on June 10, 2023, at age 81. The official cause of death was suicide. He had been transferred to a federal medical center in 2021 for terminal cancer treatment, returned to prison custody, and was found dead in his cell in the early hours of the morning. The question that has occupied criminologists, psychologists, and philosophers for 45 years is still unresolved. Was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia accurate? Or was his worldview a coherent, internally consistent philosophical position that happened to lead to murder? The FBI's own profilers disagreed. His Harvard professors disagreed. His own lawyers disagreed. He is one of the most studied minds in the history of American criminal pathology, and there is no consensus answer. Case 3. Robert Hansen. On the morning of February 18, 2001, FBI Special Agent Robert Philip Hansen drove to Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia, with a package. He placed it beneath a footbridge in the woods, a location he called Dead Drop Ellis, and returned to his car. He had done variations of this act more than 20 times over 22 years. He believed this would be one of the last. He was arrested at that footbridge by FBI surveillance teams before he reached his car. The package contained $50,000 in cash. The cash was the final payment in what federal investigators would determine was the most damaging intelligence breach in FBI history. Hansen had been selling classified information to Soviet and then Russian intelligence since 1979. He was 35 years old when he started. He had joined the FBI in 1976 after 3 years as a Chicago police officer and a brief stint as an accountant. He worked in counterintelligence, the specific division of the FBI tasked with identifying Soviet spies. He knew exactly what information the Soviets wanted. He knew exactly how the FBI tracked moles. He knew exactly how not to be caught. He was never polygraphed during his career despite bureau policies requiring it. He was promoted. He was given a commendation. He was placed in charge of an analytical unit studying Soviet intelligence operations, which meant he had a comprehensive view of what America knew about Soviet capabilities, and therefore what the Soviets did not know America knew. He used that access methodically. He revealed the identities of at least 3 Soviet officials who were secretly working as American informants. 2 of them were executed. He revealed the existence of a secret tunnel the FBI had spent approximately $300 million excavating beneath the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. He revealed the names of American intelligence operations, the technical details of nuclear war planning, and the continuity of government plans for where senior officials would shelter in the event of a nuclear strike. In exchange, he received approximately $1.4 million in cash and diamonds over 22 years. He drove a used Honda. He lived in a modest Virginia suburb. He gave large amounts of his Soviet income to a Washington, D.C. stripper named Priscilla Sue Gailey, whom he took on trips to Hong Kong and bought a used Mercedes. He later introduced her to the writings of C.S. Lewis and encouraged her to join a church. He was a devout member of Opus Dei, the traditionalist Catholic organization, and attended daily Mass. He was, by several accounts, a difficult and contemptuous man inside the bureau, a supervisor who humiliated subordinates and seemed to hold the institution in quiet disdain even as he rose through it. His colleagues found him arrogant. His enemies found him brilliant. Neither group suspected him. The investigation that caught him was triggered not by anything Hansen did wrong, but by a piece of luck. The FBI purchased a file from a former Russian intelligence officer for approximately $7 million. Inside was a trash bag Hansen had handled. The FBI ran the fingerprints against their own employee database. He was arrested, charged with 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy, and pleaded guilty on July 6, 2001. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. He never explained his full motivation, though he reportedly told investigators he had been motivated partly by money, partly by the intellectual challenge of operating undetected inside the institution he was supposed to protect, and partly by contempt. He considered himself more intelligent than the people running the FBI. He was possibly right. He died at ADX Florence on June 5, 2023, 5 days before Kaczynski. He was 79. Case 4. Eric Rudolph. On July 27, 1996, at 1:20 a.m., a pipe bomb detonated in Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta, Georgia, during the Summer Olympics. 2 people were killed. 111 were injured. The blast came from a green military knapsack that had been left beneath a bench near the sound tower, packed with nails and used to direct the fragmentation. The man who built it had grown up in western North Carolina, near Murphy, in a community with significant white separatist and anti-government presence. He had been briefly educated at home using a curriculum from a Christian identity organization. He had served in the United States Army from 1987 to 1989 before being discharged. He understood explosives, wilderness survival, and evasion. He had spent years in the mountains of the Nantahala National Forest, which covers more than 500,000 acres of some of the most difficult terrain in the eastern United States. Eric Robert Rudolph did not stop at Centennial Park. Over the next 2 years, he bombed a lesbian nightclub in Atlanta, an abortion clinic in Atlanta, and an abortion clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, where an off-duty police officer working as a security guard was killed, and a nurse was critically injured and permanently disfigured. His targets were chosen on explicitly ideological grounds. He left notes at the scenes. He communicated through the media. He called himself a soldier of the Army of God. The FBI identified him as a suspect in 1998. He disappeared before they could arrest him. He went into the mountains of western North Carolina with a truck full of supplies and did not emerge for 5 years. The manhunt involved hundreds of federal agents, military tracking assets, and infrared surveillance technology. Rudolph moved at night, foraged during the day, stole food from rural residences, and left almost no trace for 5 years. He was eventually caught not by federal tracking teams, but by a rookie police officer named Jeff Postel, working the night shift for the Murphy Police Department, who found Rudolph going through a dumpster behind a grocery store on May 31, 2003. He had been living in the mountains for 2,012 days. He pleaded guilty in April 2005 to avoid the death penalty in exchange for revealing the locations of approximately 250 pounds of buried explosives he had cached in the mountains. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. He was sent to ADX Florence, where he remains. In 2013, he published a 600-page memoir on an anti-abortion website from inside the facility. Case 5. Richard Reed. On December 22, 2001, 102 days after the September 11th attacks, American Airlines Flight 63 departed from Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport, bound for Miami with 197 people aboard. At some point over the Atlantic, a flight attendant named Hermes Moutardier noticed a passenger in seat 29H attempting to light a match near his shoe. She approached him. He told her it was none of her business. She reported him to the cockpit. She returned to check on him and found him holding a lit match to his shoe. Other passengers and crew members wrestled him to the floor and bound him to his seat with seatbelt extensions, headphone cords, and medical tape. The plane diverted to Logan Airport in Boston. When investigators examined the man's high-top basketball shoes, they found that the inner soles had been hollowed out and packed with a mixture of PETN and TATP, pentaerythritol, tetranitrate, and triacetone triperoxide, together constituting approximately 250 grams of military-grade plastic explosive. Had the fuse ignited, the explosion would have been sufficient to breach the aircraft's fuselage at altitude. Richard Colvin Reed was born August 12, 1973, in Bromley, South London. His father, Robin Reed, was Jamaican British and had served time in prison. His mother was white British. He grew up in a council estate, dropped out of school, spent time in and out of juvenile detention and young offenders institutions for petty crime. In the mid-1990s, he converted to Islam while incarcerated. He attended the Brixton Mosque in London after his release. He later traveled to Pakistan and Afghanistan and made contact with Al-Qaeda operatives. He was trained at an Al-Qaeda camp and tasked with the shoe bomb operation. He was not, by any investigator's account, an ideological mastermind. He was a foot soldier, but he was a foot soldier with real explosives and a real flight. He was arrested, tried in federal court in Massachusetts, and pleaded guilty to 8 counts of terrorism-related charges on October 4, 2002. He was sentenced on January 30, 2003, to 3 life terms plus 110 years, with no parole eligibility. At sentencing, he told the judge, "I am at war with your country." He is currently held at ADX Florence. Case 6. Clayton Fountain. This case is different from every other case on this list in one critical way. Clayton Fountain did not kill civilians. He killed government employees. He killed them inside government facilities. And he kept killing until the government had to build a new kind of prison specifically designed to stop him. Fountain enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in the early 1970s. In 1974, while stationed in Okinawa, Japan, he and another Marine beat and stabbed a fellow Marine to death. He was convicted of murder by a military tribunal and sentenced to life in prison. He was transferred to federal civilian custody. Inside Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas on June 4, 1983, Fountain and another inmate, Thomas Silverstein, whose case follows, murdered a corrections officer named Merle Klutz. That same day, in a separate incident within the same facility, a corrections officer named Robert Hoffman was killed. 2 corrections officers killed in one prison in one day. The federal prison system had never experienced anything like it. Fountain was transferred to Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois, which was the highest security federal prison in the country at that time. Inside Marion, he murdered 3 more inmates, 1 in 1983, 2 in 1985. His method was consistent. He fashioned weapons inside the prison and used them at close range, quickly, in areas with limited guard visibility. The federal government placed him in a permanent state of solitary confinement, not as a temporary disciplinary measure, but as a permanent classification. He spent the rest of his life in solitary at Marion, then at ADX Florence when it opened. He died at ADX Florence in 2004 at age 52, having spent his final 20 years in a cell measuring 7 by 12 feet, 23 hours a day. He killed 5 people across 2 countries and 3 facilities. The response to his conduct, and to Silverstein's, fundamentally changed how the United States government designed and operated maximum security prisons. Case 7. Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein is the reason ADX Florence exists. He was born February 4, 1952, in Long Beach, California. He began his criminal career with armed robberies in the early 1970s. By 1977, he had been convicted of 3 counts of armed robbery and sentenced to federal prison. Inside Leavenworth, he was recruited into the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. He rose within the organization. Between 1980 and 1983, he was convicted of 3 murders committed inside federal prisons. The first was another inmate. The second was another inmate. The third was Robert Chappelle, an inmate with whom he had a dispute over gang territory, killed in September 1981. The federal government stripped him of his privilege to intermingle with other prisoners, what the Bureau of Prisons terms no human contact status. On October 22, 1983, inside the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia, Silverstein and an accomplice approached correctional officer Merle Klutz during a cell-to-cell movement. Silverstein produced a shank, a homemade knife approximately 10 inches long, fashioned from iron railing, and stabbed Klutz 40 times. Klutz had been the officer assigned to enforce Silverstein's no-contact restrictions. Silverstein later said he killed him because Klutz had been deliberately disrespectful to him. That same day, in a coordinated and separate action at Marion, Clayton Fountain killed correctional officer Robert Hoffman. The federal government locked down Marion Federal Penitentiary. What was intended as a temporary lockdown never ended. Marion became the first federal prison to operate in permanent, full-scale solitary confinement, a model that had never existed before in the American system. When Marion's physical structure began aging beyond economic repair in the early 1990s, the Bureau of Prisons built a replacement specifically designed to prevent any prisoner from ever again being in a position to kill a staff member. That replacement was ADX Florence. Silverstein was moved to ADX Florence when it opened in 1995. He was held in a specially constructed unit, referred to internally as Silverstein's Suite, designed to ensure he could not pass any object to any other person under any circumstances. He was kept alone. His meals were delivered through a slot. His recreation, when he had it, was conducted alone in an enclosed cage. He spent 36 years in solitary confinement, the longest continuous solitary confinement in the recorded history of American corrections. He developed significant mental health deterioration. He took up painting, using materials provided by the Bureau of Prisons, and produced hundreds of works. He filed repeated legal challenges arguing his conditions constituted cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. Courts consistently ruled against him. He died at ADX Florence on May 11, 2019, at age 67, of kidney failure and congestive heart failure. He had not walked in an open space without restraints since 1983. The facility he inspired now holds more than 400 of the most dangerous federal prisoners in the United States. Every cell at ADX Florence exists because of what Silverstein and Fountain did inside Marion. Systemic failure layer. There is a moment that precedes all of these cases, not a single moment, but a pattern. McVeigh was flagged in Army psychological evaluations as having extreme anti-government views. No follow-up was conducted after his discharge. Hansen's colleagues suspected him of unusual behavior as early as the 1990s. One supervisor reportedly told another that if Hansen were a spy, they would never catch him. No investigation was opened. Kaczynski's mental health was assessed during his Harvard years under a CIA-funded psychological study called the Murray Research Project, which involved deliberately stressful psychological experiments performed on undergraduates without their full informed consent. The long-term effects on participants were never systematically studied. These are not exculpatory facts. They do not reduce culpability. 3 people are still dead from Kaczynski's bombs. 168 people are still dead from McVeigh's truck. 10 identifiable American intelligence assets compromised by Hansen include at least 2 who were executed. But the pattern is visible in the data. The men who did the most damage inside ADX Florence were not imported threats. They were products of American institutions, military, academic, law enforcement, who were processed through those institutions, shaped by them, and then turned against them with skills and knowledge the institutions themselves provided. How many systems would have to be different for these outcomes to have been different? That is not a question with a clean answer. Case 8. John Walker Lind. On November 25, 2001, Northern Alliance forces in Afghanistan overran a prison at Kala-e-Jhangi near Mazar-e-Sharif that was holding Taliban and Al-Qaeda prisoners. During the uprising, CIA officer Johnny Mikhail Span was beaten and shot to death, the first American killed in combat in the Afghan war. When Northern Alliance and American forces regained control of the prison, they found survivors in a basement flooded with water and fire. Among the survivors was a 20-year-old American man from Marin County, California, covered in mud and suffering from wounds to both legs. His name was John Philip Walker Lind. He had been born August 9, 1981, in Washington, D.C., the son of a federal government attorney and a Catholic healthcare worker. He grew up in Marin County. one of the wealthiest and most liberal counties in the United States, attended a Waldorf school and converted to Islam at age 16 after reading a library copy of The Autobiography of Malcolm X. At 17, he traveled to Yemen to study Arabic. At 19, he traveled to Pakistan. At 20, he crossed into Afghanistan and enrolled in an Al-Qaeda training camp. He trained with Al-Qaeda operatives. He met Osama bin Laden twice by his own account. He was armed and fighting on the Taliban side when American forces arrived in October 2001. He was transported to the USS Peleliu for medical treatment. He was questioned by Johnny Michael Spann, the same CIA officer killed hours later in the Kala-e-Jhangi uprising. Video of that interview, in which Lind remained largely silent, was broadcast internationally. The legal case against Lind was complicated by the fact that he had broken no American law prior to September 11, 2001, when he was already in Afghanistan. He had committed no act of terrorism against Americans. He had trained with Al-Qaeda before the attacks. After the attacks, he remained with his unit. He was not among the prisoners who participated in the Kala-e-Jhangi uprising. He was charged with conspiracy to murder Americans and several weapons charges. He pleaded guilty on July 15, 2002, and was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He served his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana, and was released on May 23, 2019, with 3 years of parole supervision, during which he was prohibited from accessing the Internet without prior approval and was required to communicate only in English. His release was not without controversy. He had given a 2015 interview from prison in which he expressed continued support for the establishment of an Islamic State. The Trump administration sought to revoke his release conditions. The court did not comply. He is free. He lives in Ireland, where he obtained citizenship through an Irish grandmother after failing to receive permission to remain in the United States under his parole terms. His case is the most legally ambiguous on this list and the most sociologically legible. He was a child of privilege from one of America's most progressive counties, raised in comfort, radicalized through a public library book, and transported into a war zone by the Internet and international travel, tools of globalization that existed precisely because the society he rejected had built them. Verdict and current status. As of May 2026, ADX Florence holds approximately 400 to 450 inmates in conditions designed to prevent any contact between prisoners that could result in violence, coordination, or escape. The facility operates under a regime in which prisoners may spend their entire sentence, sometimes measured in decades, without ever touching another human being. No inmate has successfully escaped. Of the 8 cases profiled here, McVeigh was executed in 2001. Kaczynski died at ADX in 2023. Hansen died at ADX in 2023. Fountain died at ADX in 2004. Silverstein died at ADX in 2019. Reed and Rudolph remain incarcerated. Lind is free in Ireland. 7 of the 8 were, at some formative point, products of American institutions: the soldier, the mathematician, the counterintelligence specialist, the military-trained survivalist, the radicalized convert, the Marine, the armed robber who became a murderer inside the system designed to contain him, and the teenager from Marin County. The moral close, ADX Florence, was built to be the end of the line, a place from which nothing escapes and nothing returns, and in a physical sense it works. No one has gotten out. No one has successfully coordinated an attack from inside its walls. The concrete holds. But the question that the facility cannot answer, the question that none of its 4,500-pound reinforced walls are designed to address, is the one that precedes the walls entirely. 8 men. 8 American institutions. 8 points of entry where something was allowed to go wrong, or left unexamined, or was produced by the very machinery of the state itself. Was ADX Florence the solution to an American problem? Or is it the building America constructed so it wouldn't have to look at where these men actually came from? Which of these 8 cases shocked you the most? Drop your answer below. And if you think someone built by the same system could still be out there undetected, let me know who you have in mind. Subscribe plus bell so the next case comes straight to you. Every case in this series has one moment where everything could have gone differently. Find it before I do.